Okay, I can start. I'm Sara Petti. I'm the community manager for Frictionless Data. I've been here for now almost a year. I'm based in Italy, where I just moved a month ago in Bologna, and before I used to be in Hamburg, Germany. I'll just pick someone else. Julian, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Julian Pistorius. I'm a software engineer at the University of Arizona at the College of Agriculture and Life Science. I help researchers with data pipelines and helping them use computing. I'm here because I'm helping a Camtrap project, actually. So this is very good timing. I'm also involved with the Research Bazaar, which is a grassroots community where researchers and engineers get together.
Would you like to pick someone else, Julian, to introduce him or herself?
Peter, he's right next to me on the camera.
Hi, I'm Peter Desmet. I'm an open data coordinator at the Research Institute for Nature and Forest based in Belgium. And I'm going to talk about Camtrap DP, a community format for camera trapping data using frictionless standards. And I'm picking Keith.
Hey, good morning or evening or afternoon, everyone. I'm Keith Hewitt. I'm a postdoc at NIH and NCI and do work on kind of precision medicine related efforts, and am more generally interested in using frictionless and other methods to make it easier to integrate data and just work with data overall. And I will pick Francisco.
So I'm Francisco. I'm responsible for running the State of Minas Gerais Open Data Portal. I'm back in the office for the first day here in Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais. And I think I'll pick Steve.
Good morning, good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Steve Diggs, Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I'm the technical director for hydrographic data, which is in oceanography, and we are just starting to warm to the idea of frictionless data and realize that it's software in our head that's going to have to change. And I am going to pick Lily.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Lily. I'm the product manager for the Frictionless Data Project. I'm based in Austin, Texas, and it's actually cold here today. So that's my kind of interesting fact for fall weather. And I will pick Aditya. Can you hear us? Okay, maybe not. I will pick Alexander.
Hi everyone, my name is Alexander Balik. I'm a research fellow in University College Cork. So I'm based in Ireland, Cork, and I do energy systems modeling. I build energy systems models, and it's my first time joining this call. And we started using frictionless to disseminate our results. Oh yeah, and I'm going to pick Edgar.
Hi, I'm Edgar. I'm based in Italy, and but originally I'm from Brazil. But last 6 years lived in Berlin, working as a software developer with Open Knowledge Deutschland, and now I'm in Open Knowledge Foundation. Yeah. And I don't know if there's someone missing to pick.
I think Jonathan.
Jonathan, then.
All right, my name is Jonathan Mitchell. I'm a software developer for a company called Innovi Health. I'm based out of Washington State in the US, and interested in frictionless for my job and for the healthcare industry in general. So we'll see if I can make any waves there. And then I guess we'll give Aditya another chance.
Oops, yeah.
Or Michael? I'll pass it back to you, Sarah or Sarah.
Yes, I think Michael joined just at the right moment to introduce himself, and Ben as well. So
Hi, I'm Michael. I don't really know what to say. I've been coming to these meetings kind of on and off for a while now. Been working with frictionless data for several years, since 2014. And yeah, I guess that's all I'll say this time around.
Thanks, Michael. And Ben, welcome to the Frictionless Data Call. If you want to quickly introduce yourself, we are recording the call just for the records. So if you want to turn off your webcam, you're more than welcome to do so.
So my name is Ben Norton. I'm head of technology at Museum of Natural Sciences in North Carolina. And I'm here, I work with Peter on Camtrap DP. I'm here to watch this presentation.
Great. Okay, thanks very much. I think we did the tour. So without further waiting, welcome once again to the Frictionless Data monthly call, and I'll pass it to Peter.
Try to share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see my screen, the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is an extended version of a talk that I gave last month, but since from the introductions, nobody's working in biodiversity informatics except for Ben. I'm going to introduce a bit the landscape that we're working in and where Camtrap DP fits and how it uses frictionless standards. So I'm Peter de Smet. I work for the Open Science Lab for Biodiversity. We're based at the Research Institute for Nature and Forest in Imbo. And our team, we are 6 people, and we support researchers with open data publications, so making sure that research data is publicly available. And also we are developing software, mainly research software such as R packages. Biodiversity information is basically information about the occurrence of species. So what species were found when and where. And sources for that information are very broad. Citizen scientists now make up the largest source of this type of information. And iNaturalist is an international platform where anyone can create an account to record what they see in the wild. But traditionally, there's also been museum collections, monitoring programs, and more sensors that are collecting information on the species around us. Most of this information there is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which is, or GBIF for short, which is a platform where people and organizations can publish biodiversity information. So the information that they collected can be published to this central platform. And this has been ongoing for the last 20 years. And a lot of the things in publishing open data are aspects that we've encountered as well, and that have been solved along the way to make this platform possible. So it is an international platform. It is currently hosts close to 2 billion records of species observations. You can see the lower map there. And the very important aspect here is that the data is published in a common data format. So whatever the source of the data, it is using this common data format to submit data to GBIF. And that allows cross dataset search and API, like across all these datasets, no matter what the source, you can search for a species across all this dataset and find occurrences. All data is Creative Commons license, either CC0, CC BY, or CC BY non-commercial. And there is an advanced system for citation tracking. So every download you make on this platform gets a digital object identifier, or a DOI, which you can then reference in your papers so that the publishers of the data are acknowledged and can actually see where their data is used. This common data format is called Darwin Core. It is maintained by the organization Biodiversity Information Standards, which had a conference, an annual conference that happened last month, where I presented Camtrap DP. The Darwin Core is basically a common set of terms to facilitate the exchange of biodiversity information. So it's not much more than a term and a definition. For example, scientific name, we mean that by the term scientific name, or event date, that is the definition of event date. And there's also Darwin Core Archive, which is a kind of a package format for biodiversity information, which has been in use for over 11 years now. And it looks a bit similar to Frictionless data package. So you have a number of CSV files that are related. And then you have 2 XML files rather than a JSON file that are describing the metadata and the structure. This is packaged up and published on the platforms of the different organizations that are publishing to GBIF. And GBIF is then harvesting that data to make it available on the gbif.org website. So that is a bit of a precursor of biodiversity informatics, where publishing biodiversity information has been ongoing for a long time in a standard that is well established called Darwin Core. Camtrap DP then. So camera trapping is a wildlife monitoring technique that is non-invasive. You can set up a camera and mostly animals will not notice it. It's also well established. It's generating more and more data every year. And it enables the study of animal abundance, distribution, and behavior. But it is data intensive, so it generates lots of images or videos. And to support management of this data, there are a number of data management platforms where you can upload and manage the images that your cameras have taken and annotate them with the species identification. This is traditionally done by humans who go through the images to say and identify the species that were recorded, but more and more AI is used to help humans in annotating all these images. There are a number of platforms out there, European ones as well as ones based in the US, but there is limited data exchange between those platforms and also limited data purification from this platform. So they act a little bit as silos. They serve their community pretty well, but not a lot of data is getting out of these platforms, and almost none of this data makes it to, for example, GBIF, where anyone could be able to use that data in combination with other data. So we could use Darwin Core archives as an exchange format for this type of information, but Darwin Core is really a common ground for all type of biodiversity information, so not specific for camera trap data. And that has as the disadvantage that, yeah, you cannot capture the full scope of camera trap data. For example, the project setup, your camera setup are typically things you cannot express in the Darwin Core archive. And also the cameras will very often capture blank, vehicle, or unknown sequences of images, which can also not be expressed in Darwin Core. The relationships that are allowed in Darwin Core archives are also too limited to really express camera trap data. And the biggest problem is that Darwin Core is a format that will not be recognized by camera trap researchers. So they will not use this format as a preferred format for analyzing data. And that is why we started developing Camtrap DP, and that stands for Camera Trap Data Package. So the name data package from Frictionless data packages is incorporated in the name, and is designed to capture all essential data and metadata of a single camera trap study. Of course, data management platforms can capture more information, but Camtrap DP is really capturing the essential information that is required for analysis or to archive your data at the end of a study, for example. It is a model to exchange camera trap data and also a format to exchange camera trapping data. The model, you have metadata about the project or study, and then there are deployments. This is, you've set up your camera at a certain point for a certain, from a start date until an end date at a certain location. And deployments also have camera information, for example, how the camera was oriented. And then throughout this setup, the camera can capture media files. This can either be done on a regular time interval or using a motion sensor if an animal passes. These media files can also be organized in sequences, which is a burst of images that are related. And then the observations are basically the species identifications based on those images, which can be done for every image, which is very labor intensive, except for AI, or what is typically more done when annotated by humans is at the sequence level. I have, for example, seen one moorhen and one coot in this sequence of images. There are also, as I mentioned, blank sequences as well. So a trigger where, for example, grass was waving, but no animal was captured. The way we format that data is something that you will recognize is as a frictionless data package. So the metadata is stored in the data package JSON file, where we also store the project metadata. And then we have 3 CSV files, the deployments, the media that were captured in those deployments, and then the observations based on those media files, with a number of identifiers between those 3 files. A number of foreign keys between those files. So we are using frictionless standards for this, which is something rather new for biodiversity information. And the ones that we are using is data package, obviously, for datasets, the data resource, which describes the data files, and then table schema to define the fields in those CSV files. And what we really like is that it's a simple way of describing data. It's machine usable and also extendable, which is exactly what we're doing with Camtrap DP. So we have developed our own custom data package profile, which references and extends data package. The link that you see in orange, might be very small, is basically referencing data package. So a Camtrap data package must be a data package. So all the requirements that are there in data package are also there in Camtrap data package. But we do 2 additional things. One is we have additional requirements or strict requirements for some of the properties. For example, we think that contributors and created, which are optional in data package, must be there, are required for a Camtrap data package. And we also require these 3 specific resources, the deployments, the media, and the observations CSVs. And we also add a number of new properties. For example, the organization that captured the data, the project information with some sampling setup and some metadata or project study level metadata to really describe how this data was captured. And then also the spatial, temporal, and taxonomic scope of this data set. From when till when was this project set up, at what place, and what are the species that were captured with this study. And then we have 3 table schemas, one for each of the 3 resources, which describe the relationship between the resources, and as a typical table schema also for every field has the name, a definition, the type and format that we expect for that field, whether it's required, the controlled vocabularies, which are expressed as an enum in the constraints. And we also link out to related definitions. For example, many of the definitions that we have are reusing Darwin core definitions. And to indicate the link between a field that we have and Darwin core, we use a property SCOS exact match to link out, or SCOS narrow match to link out to the Darwin core definition, saying this field here is basically the same as that field or that term in Darwin core. So how should data sets reference Camtrap DP? That is something we've been struggling with a little bit. For the profile, it's fairly easy. There's a profile property, and we can link to our Camtrap DP profile, which can be a URL including a version. So you can publish a data set saying, I'm using Camtrap DP 0.1.6. And any validation software then validate against that profile. And since the profile itself references data package, it would also validate against data package. For the table schemas, initially we included those verbosely in the data package JSON. So just copy pasting all the definitions and all the requirements for the fields. And that allows us to omit or reorder fields. So for some fields that are not occurring in your data and that are not required by Camtrap DP, you can just not include those in your CSV file and then also not include them in the table schema. The biggest problem with including the table schema verbosely, though, is that you're not validating against Camtrap DP. You're validating it against what a publisher has copied from Camtrap DP. So we didn't really think that's to be a good approach, because you're basically validating against what the publisher says is there rather than against the standards. So we've now recommended to the schema property for every resource must link out to the Camtrap DP table schemas, so all 3 of them. The disadvantage is that that now requires all fields to be included in the CSV. There are options in Frictionless Spy to do that, but they're not included by default. And we want to be able to have Camtrap DP datasets be validated using all the default settings. Another disadvantage is that as a publisher, you need to reference 4 schemas, the 4 orange links that you can see, which it would be better if you could just reference one thing. So that could be an improvement for using Frictionless Standards, or how we can link to schemas that are developed by a community. We already have one data set in the Camtrap DP format that is published on Zenodo, and the data package JSON is not zipped with the rest of the data. So the CSV files and the JSON are all accessible individually. And that has the big advantage that you can actually load the data package JSON and see all the metadata and all the resources without downloading all the data. And this can especially be very useful for the multimedia CSV, which can be very, very, very big. So that allows you to explore a data set and only, for example, look at the observations without loading the media files. And as I've mentioned, this data set references Camtrap DP rather than including it verbosely. So you can very clearly see what version of the standard was used to publish this data set. The development, so Camtrap DB development is open and versioned on GitHub. The URL is in the bottom left corner. And the repository hosts versions of the Camtrap DP profile and the 3 table schemas, and also includes an example data set that is valid according to that version of the schema, which we use to also for automated testing. So if we make changes to the schema, that we are making sure that the example is updated with the schema as well. It's also collaborative, so the community interacts through issues, as is typical for a GitHub repository, and any change made to the standards requires a pull request review. So no changes can be made to the main branch without somebody having checked that actually makes sense as a change to the standard. There's also a website which hosts the Camtrap DP profile and the table schemas as human readable documentation. And this is all generated automatically from the source files. So we are using GitHub Pages and a Jekyll team called Petri Dish. And then we have 2 specific layouts who are basically taking the JSON files and translating it into human readable documentation. That is a nice feature that Jekyll has that allows to transform data into human readable documentation. And I like this feature actually so much that I have started reusing it for other websites where I'm using frictionless schemas and I want to express it as human readable documentation. So this is one for seabird at sea data, where again, I have a table with every field, a definition, and listing the controlled vocabulary and listing the type, so that humans publishing this data can actually read this documentation. And it's automatically updated with every version of the standard. The software, I'm using Frictionless Spy, but mainly to just validate data sets that I'm publishing. So that is a very easy way to just make sure that a data set that I'm, for example, publishing on Zenodo is according to the specifications in Camtrap DP. In the biodiversity science, however, Python is getting used more and more, but R is typically the software language that is used for biodiversity science. And there isn't a data package R package hosted by Frictionless, but I had a little bit of issues using that one. It's very object-oriented, which is typically not what R packages are. So I've developed or started an R package that plays nice with the Tidyverse, which is a framework in R with a whole bunch of packages that work in a similar way. And it currently only has 2 functionality or 2 functions. There's read package, where you can load a data package JSON file, as you can see in the example. I also made sure that if you load that from Zenodo, for example, that it's also going to reference and or warn the user to credit this data source when they're using it. And then you can ask for the resource names. So in this one, it's deployments, multimedia, and observations. And then there's the second function called read resource, which is reading the CSV file or multiple CSV files or zipped CSV files into one singular data frame, and that can then immediately be used for analysis. And this is something that our researchers who use Camtrap information are already using to load Camtrap DP data for doing analysis on wildlife. Write functionality is not there. That is something we need to develop. But we so far have not found a use for it. It's more supporting users to actually read the data they have published into R. The next steps for Camtrap DP are, well, frictionless standards. I'm using it more and more for biodiversity data. So our team is also working on GPS tracking data for birds. I've recently published a number of data sets that are now all expressed as data packages. And the big advantage is that those data sets were already published as a number of CSV files. But by adding the data package JSON, I can basically have a technical description of how those CSV files are related. It also allows me to use the data package R package to immediately load all that data or read all that data into an R environment. The same is done for acoustic telemetry data for fish. And I'm working to also set up community standards around frictionless data for biological signals and weather radar data. So weather radar data can also, or weather radars can detect birds, and that data is currently expressed in a horrible format. And yeah, I want to convince that community to also use data packages. So if you look on Zenodo and use the keyword frictionless data, you can discover a number of data sets that have been published as frictionless data packages. The other thing is, well, frictionless biodiversity data currently cannot be harvested by GBIF, so that is a big disadvantage. By publishing Camtrap data, for example, in this format, you can express all the essential data, but you're not really publishing your data to GBIF. So what we need is a lossy transformation to Darwin Core. And I mean lossy as in transforming to Darwin Core, you will not be able to capture everything in Darwin Core, but that's not a problem either because the source data set with all the original information is already published. So transforming to Darwin Core is technically possible, but that transformation requires community review. So we need a community approved way of, for example, translating Camtrap DP to Darwin Core. And I think we also need software to do it so that transformation can be done almost semi-automatically. And we are working on a project for bird tracking data to transform bird tracking data expressed as frictionless data to Darwin Core. And I hope to reuse that software for camera trapping data. Other software is we want to convince the data management platforms to support Camtrap DP as an export format. So there's already 2 of the data management platforms that have developed functionality to do so. And the other thing I want to do is expand data package, R package. So data sets that have, because publishing biodiversity data in frictionless standards, it's not going to have a huge uptake if people cannot consume those data sets that have been published either. And then for the other thing, when developing this schema, we've discovered a number of things where I think the frictionless specs could be improved, and we want to collaborate on that. One of them is allow data sets to omit fields that are not required. So support the schema sync by default, so that you can have a CSV file that does not use all the fields expressed in the community schema. Also, it's sometimes a bit difficult to know how we can extend data package, how we can add more requirements for existing properties. We're running into a couple of issues there. It would be nice that that is documented better. And it would be very nice if rather than having those 4 URLs, publishers can just reference a single endpoint for a standard. Some of these things, and maybe people in the call might already have ideas on how to solve that, and I'm very happy to hear that. So in summary, Camtrap DP captures the essential data and metadata of a Camtrap study. It's a data exchange model and a format. For the format, we opted for Frictionless Standards, data package, which we have extended, data resource, which are the CSV files, and table schemas, for which we have defined 3. It's open, versioned, and collaborative. And we've, in working with this, have some feedback for the Frictionless Standards. And I think Frictionless Standards are absolutely fantastic, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel there, but to support Camtrap or community schemas. A lot is already there, but there's some minor nitpicks that could be improved. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter, for the presentation, and thanks also for the feedback for Frictionless data. That's duly noted. I'll maybe open the floor for discussion. If anyone has a question, just raise your hand or go ahead.
Great presentation, and I appreciate your efforts to put out the R package interfacing with Tidyverse and also give feedback on the specs. That's all sounds really useful. You probably mentioned this and I just missed it. You said that some of the Camtrap data is encoded in large CSV files. Did you mean that like the image blobs are added to the CSV files?
No, so the images are, I didn't cover the part where the images are also published. The CSV file about the images is just basically the links to the images. But since you can have millions of images, that CSV file itself can become quite big too, especially if you include the EXIF data in that CSV file as well, which we don't do. But publishing the images is another thing. Those could be published on something like Zenodo or another platform, but we found that the data management platforms are probably a better repository for those images rather than having users transferring images from one repository to the next.
Okay, but have you considered like, something like data package for the image data itself? This is something that I'm wondering about, and I know it's like a perennial discussion here, but it's basically, it seems like a lot of the focus in Frictionless is on tabular data, and that's just a slice of what's out there. And I wonder, like more generally, how much Frictionless is interested in expanding to other types of data. I mean, this is a question for everyone now, but yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on like, if you think there's a good way to interface them.
Yeah, for me, there's two. I mean, for the images themselves, what I really like about Frictionless is that people are already publishing data like we have. We're publishing CSV files, and just having this data package as an extra file there provides an entry point and describes the structure of the information. Yeah. That could technically be done for the images too, but there are already, I think, better services for hosting images. And for Camtrap DP, it just made a lot of sense to just say, here is where you can find the image, and all the EXIF data could be included in that image, but we kept it limited to, we're agnostic about where the image is, but you need an URL to point to the image. For other tabular data files, there is interest from JBIF to support the AVRO, AVRO, which is tabular data in a binary format. And they're looking, is it possible for Frictionless to have data resources that express AVRO files? So that is, the issue with CSV files, of course, is that they're not strongly typed and that you can have conversion issues. And yeah, that would be one that they are interested in, that Frictionless could support as another tabular format than CSV.
Okay. The size of your package would explode as well. I mean, each deployment could have 1,000 images, right? And so if you include blanks, like things that just sort of triggered, and with identifications, I mean, you just get massive amounts of files.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Okay, I'm just curious. I'm just starting to think about some of these things myself, because most of the data I tend to work with on a day-to-day basis is tabular matrix data, which is easy to represent that way. But I'm very much aware and interested in working towards solutions that are more general and support things like image, spectral data, or sequence data in the bio community.
There's other complications too, because the licensing for images is separate from the data itself usually. And so then you have things like sensitive, like people. Sometimes you need face, you know, what I mean? And just make sure people are not, I mean, we have rangers in Africa who we'd rather not identify as people in a picture, right? And so, I mean, these get very complicated very quickly, right?
Okay, well, thanks.
Okay, I think Julian was next, and then I'll have Edgar and then Lily.
All right, thank you. Actually, so I work with Susan Melissa, who just joined. See, I didn't see when she joined. She's a researcher at the University of Arizona, working on a project that has been going for almost 10 years now, gathering data, Camtrap data, wildcat, jaguars, all those sort of things. So my questions are going to be around sensitive species data. In the US, we have federal laws around the kind of data that you publish there, because there are hunters who do freedom of information requests to the group regularly to try and find out where these animals are. I noticed that in your schema, you do have a location, like uncertainty field there, which is very good. So that's definitely useful. What I was wondering is a few questions. Repositories which will host sensitive species data. I've only looked at a couple. The people who work on frictionless data have a data hub, but they don't take sensitive species data. Does GBIF do? And is it open to US researchers?
They do not make those decisions. There's a lot of complicating factors here. I mean, so you could do a blank. I deal with collections data a lot too, and this is a big issue there too. You could do a blanket one, take the IUCN and say if it's a certain code, wipe out county level, latitude, longitude, locality remarks. The problem is though, that doesn't really work for localized sensitive species, right? And so you might have, overall it might not be vulnerable, but then in a certain location it is. And so then it becomes very complicated very quickly. And then you deal with all the political issues and things of that nature. And so GBIF does not. The common practice is to remove that. But if you go look at, we had bog turtles the other day with herpetology. And if you go, you'll see multiple, they're on iDigBio and GBIF, they're there. They don't make those distinctions. They hope there's a best practices guide. And but there's not a community-wide standard for scrubbing that out. I mean, how big do you make your circle? Do you scrub it 50, 100 meters, or what I mean? I mean, different sizes, and then the range of the animals. There's a lot of things there. There should be a standard. I would think anybody would disagree, maybe except for people filing to get this of information. But it's just it's complicated, and so there needs to be establishment of this kind of things. And GBIF's got a great best practice guy that came out recently on that. Arthur Chapman's he's been doing stuff with the collections for a long time, and I'd highly recommend checking out that. But there's not a set standard, and we need to work on this.
Yeah, I will hunt for that link that Ben just mentioned. Arthur Chapman in the GBIF community has been working on this for over 30 years on location information. But as Ben mentioned, at the GBIF level, GBIF is all open data. So there's no closed data, there's no data. You cannot hunt for more open access data or more precise data based on your login. It's all open data. So the practice there is to fuzzy the information on the locality, which is the most sensitive when it comes to sensitive species. And then you also mentioned that you actually have a Camtrap study running for more than 10 years. Are you using any of the platforms such as Wildlife Insights or eMammal for managing your data? No.
And so you can probably expand on that, but it's been done using this particular file format, directory format structure for most of the time in the history of it was going. And so a student at the University of Arizona wrote a Java desktop application that does some of that and pushes it to the Cyverse data store, and then allows scientists and citizen scientists to collaborate on this by having this application that you can download, collaborate on this collection with people in a private, secure way, annotate images collaboratively, and then push it out to this secure data store that's sort of managed by Cyverse's authentication. Hand wavy, I can go into details, but it's not important for now. What we would like to do is to find some way to preserve this data long term. So this is a very valuable data set, but do so in a responsible way to maintain. Historically, this data sits in a desk shelf like drawer on hard drives, and they don't ever see the light of day. So it seems responsible to make sure that is out there in some way.
Yeah, there is a field in Darwin Core called information withheld. And so for the sensitive species for herpetology, for example, we put in the comments, if it is, we wipe out latitude, longitude, county, and locality marks. And then in the information withheld field, we say, hey, this is sensitive species, please contact the curator. So in the published data set, we wipe it out, but anything before that, like the internal collections database, we keep it. And so it's just wiped out at that publishing marker. And if you want it, you can go to the curator. So it's preserved internally, but it's just withheld from external exposure.
Yeah.
I'll ask questions again at the end, but I don't want to like take over for everybody. So, but I would like to come back again and ask some more.
Sure. Okay. Thanks. Edgar was next, I think. Are you muted, Edgar?
Yeah. First of all, great work. I worked years ago in a biological laboratory, and most of my time was spent like converting Excel spreadsheets from one place to other to import in R, and it was like there was no frictionless data package at the time. It was just starting up, but it's really great. And I have a question about how do you deal with categorical data? Because I know that there is an ongoing discussion right now for data package to include this, and I think you could add a lot in this discussion.
So for categorical information, so for example, you mean controlled vocabularies where you have very distinct values, is that one? Yes. So in Camtrap DP, when we require distinct values that need to be part of a vocabulary, we express that as an enum. So that is something that is supported in table schema. And the data package R package, when it sees in the table schema that there is an enum, will read that data in as a factor. So that in R, there is a data type for categorical information called factor. So when the enum is there, it's going to load data in as a factor. So on the schema part, we use enum, and on the data package R package part, we use factors when there is an enum present.
Okay, thanks. Lily? Oh, do you have no?
Yeah,
you,
I have a question. Yeah, thanks, Peter. This was really great and helpful. My question is if you've looked at the frictionless Darwin core code before.
Yes, I actually know Andre quite well, but that is developed to transform Darwin core archives into frictionless data. And what we want to do is the other way around. So where you have data that is expressed as a frictionless data package, because we're not restricted by the Darwin core terms. You can express whatever you want and transform that into Darwin core.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if it would be helpful at all, and if you had known Andre. So
yeah, he's an old boss of mine.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Okay, thanks, Lily. Before I go back to you, Julian, maybe I'll just let Francisco have his question.
So congrats on the presentation, Peter. Very nice presentation. So I'm also mostly an R user, and I also feel that it is missing some of the tooling that we have for the Python ecosystem in R. I was wondering if you are thinking in expanding the scope of the package, or if you wanted to focus on reading data, because like that is what consumers are doing, right? Publishers need the rest of the stack, but consumers are just reading. And if you have considered using an approach to wrap frictionless PI with, for example, the reticulate package, or if you are considering expanding, if it would be like a full implementation similar to what the currently maintained data package and table schema, I think it's Open Knowledge Greek, if I remember correctly. So just to hear your thoughts, and just to add on Edgar question about the categorical variables, have you do you need to store, like in budgetary data, that's what I work on. I many times I need to sort the code, the label, and some description, some extra descriptions about the field, the meaning of the field. If you needed to store that, or it's just the enum with like the values that could occur, right?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here for the category of values. The definition of the field is something we can describe in the description, which is a property in table schemas. For the values, we can the values, the category, we can only have the values. So currently enum, it doesn't really support much in the sense of a controlled vocabulary. It's just saying these are the allowed values, but it doesn't link out to what those values mean. So that's another thing where I think there is improvements, and in the biodiversity community, there's a lot of work on vocabularies, and it would be really nice that I could link out to vocabulary saying these are the values that are accepted by this term, but currently that is not supported. So that's another idea. And then for our data package, I mean, I started this one because I was a bit frustrated in using the datapackage.r R package. But for the roadmap there, I don't think I'll go with reticulate. I think it's going to be a bit easier to just have limited functionality than just developing an R using the dplyr and the tidyverse packages there. But I do want to extend it to be able to write a data package from a data frame. So let's say you have a data frame in R and you want to export it as a CSV with a table schema. That is functionality I would like to develop. But I think at some point we'll have to think about the datapackage.r and my own attempt and how we can merge those two and have one official package that supports our users and that is actually maintained. So I'm just going to add in the chat the IDs I have for additional functions.
Great, thanks. And Julian, do you have another question?
I was just going to say, if anybody else wants to go ahead, please do. Okay, great. Sorry. I have a question about whether there are any data repositories that use frictionless data in general as a data interchange format. So I'm thinking particularly of I see that there's an application currently being developed by Frictionless Data, which I assume is going to allow people to create data packages and also upload them and validate them. But yeah, are there repositories or services that allow can basically have like frictionless data as a backend? Is there anything like that?
Sorry, my internet connection dropped for 10 seconds. Could you repeat?
Are there any services or data management systems which allow applications to use frictionless data packages as essentially an interchange format? Instead of calling an API, you're downloading and uploading packages, doing stuff locally, pushing it back up, and then collaborating with people just purely on that data.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there is people from the Frictionless community probably know about software that has been developed to work around and collaborate around frictionless data package. So I'll let them answer that. But what I would like to see, however, is that research repositories like Zenodo and Dryad support data package or provide more functionality on top of the data package JSON. So one of the annoying things, for example, is when you upload a data set to a research repository is you have to fill out a lot of metadata. And so where do I draw the line? What do I put in my data package and what do I write in the metadata of the repository? It would be nice that there is like a closer link between those two. So far I've kept the metadata package, the data package JSON file. I didn't put any description of the data set in there. I'm going to do that all in the repository, but that kind of collaboration would be nice. But to collaborate on data packages, that I do not know about.
And it's a question for the frictionless people on the call is there a guide for how to collaborate on frictionless data packages or a platform or something in the works?
Well, Lily, do you want to answer this question.
Sure, yeah, I just put a link into the chat, and let me know if you can't hear me. My audio's been cutting in and out. Okay, I just put a link in the chat to a tool called Schema Collaboration that one of our previous Tool Fund collaborators built. And it is a tool that he made for his own research group to be able to work with data packages and specifically edit like metadata and schemas between researchers and data managers. And so he gave a talk, it's Carlos gave a talk, oh, I don't know, a few months ago about it. So maybe, Sarah, you could find the like community call link and send that to Julian. And then we've recently done a collaboration with Dryad, which again, they presented, I think 2 community calls ago. And basically they added in the frictionless validation to their upload system. So anytime that data packages, or not data packages, anytime data is uploaded, it runs through frictionless validation to do some quick checks. Those are the 2 examples that come to me off the top of my head. But the applications that we're working on right now are made up of frictionless React components that can be reused. So I'd say that's something to look out for in the future. Hopefully we'll have a prototype of that this year. Yes, the plan there is that it would be components that you could take and like put in your backend or put on your own app.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just found the blog with the presentation that Carlos gave in January in the community call. So you just have it in the chat. And that's the
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm very sorry, but I don't think we can accept any more questions because we are 3 minutes to the hour. But I wanted to take some time to make some community announcements. So the first one is that our next community call is exactly in 1 month on the 16th of December, and we're going to have Keith here presenting some ideas about representing data processing flows as a DAGs inside. And maybe Keith, do you want to say a few words about it?
Sure. So this is very much kind of in the works and something I've just been thinking about recently. And so mainly I just want to share my thoughts and see if other people find it interesting and want to explore it further. The basic idea though is to try to provide a means to move away from static representations of data. So data is typically published, you get a static snapshot of the process form that gets published, and then that's typically done by an individual behind closed doors, at least in science and research often. And what I would like to move towards is a more open process where you have many people trying to work through collectively a whole data processing flow and understand each step and kind of come to a better decision. And then I think a vehicle through which that can happen is kind of an extension of the data package standard where you encode not just a single data set, but like the entire processing DAG within it. And then there are all kinds of ways you can think about visualizing the DAG, representing uncertainty, and incorporating views and annotations, and then publishing into the GitHub in a way that people could collaborate on and iteratively move towards something better. So yeah, that's what I'm going to talk about.
Great. Thanks, Keith. Then the other announcement that I wanted to make is that we're organizing again the FOSDEM Dev Room. So just a heads up, we haven't had the confirmation yet that the Dev Room is going to happen, but most probably yes. And quite quickly, we're going to look for open up for presentations. So in case you have anything in mind, we would love to support you in any ways. If you want to present something frictionless related, just let us know. We can help you shape it if you need to, or just we can think about ways to make this work. And I think that's it from my side. Lily, did you want to add anything?
Nope, just thanks to Peter again for that great presentation.
Yes. Sure. So thanks, Peter. Thanks everyone for joining, and I'll see you again in 1 month.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Everything.
Thanks.